we start off by actually, in an ideal world, really talking to lots of people, don't we? Really getting it under the skin of the organisation, I suppose.
And I think that the shorthand for that is standing in the shoes of our clients and walking a mile. But doing maybe the same for their customers and their suppliers.
Yeah, I was going to say it's often the customer, because you do quite a lot of talking to the customer research.
Yes.
To actually find out why people really do buy from an organisation.
Yes, because it's not always the thing that we assume it is. Or the for that matter, the thing that our client assumes that it is.
And again, it's this: if you ask your clients through, say, a Google survey, how they rate you, they may give you a skewed answer, or they may give you the answer that they feel they ought to give you because you gave them a great piece of work or a great price.
And the other thing that doesn't allow you to do a survey is to find out. So it'll tell you what decision has been made, and maybe the rating of that decision, but it doesn't give you any descriptive term as to why they made the decision. So it may be that perhaps they've chosen to make the purchase because actually the buying experience was really nice, or the packaging was lovely, or perhaps the person that they engaged with had a sense of humour, and that clicked them over from choosing one product as against another. You don't know until you ask the question, so why did you buy that? What was the reason you chose to work with those people? And it might be, there's certain compliance things they need to achieve, but actually the thing that tipped them over the edge is that, they were doing it with a sense of humour.
So it's I suppose the approach we take is really understanding how the business functions, what it offers in a valuably different way, and then trying to create a compelling brand story or brand proposition that they can either use for their staff or for their outside marketing.
Yeah, and I think ideally we'd do that 360-degree research. Sometimes it's not feasible, sometimes it's not affordable. So it may be that you have to just do some, if you like, vox pops with individuals to get a feel for what that external perception is. And gather that together with what you've learnt from inside. And a bit like you were saying earlier, how you're creating order from chaos. You have a chaos of information, but actually analysing it, you discover that information starts to fall into categories. And those categories very often align with a set of values that can be expressive of what the valuable difference that organisation has to offer. So it's a weird process, but weird is wrong. It's a surprising process.
Well, I think if you come from a different angle, if you just said it was a cosmetic process, the downside of doing that alone is that it becomes surface deep, that it doesn't really get into the difference an organisation can make, and you're just trying to kind of make it look fashionable, perhaps. Which some people, that's what they need. But I think if you can go a bit deeper, it does start to bring out that real difference all the time.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing about that promise performance triangle I do, the vicious or virtuous circle. That if you do something cosmetically without reference to what's actually being delivered and experienced, then the people that then make a purchase then experience something that's probably not aligned with the promise that's been delivered, been communicated in the brand. And if it's not aligned, then are they going to bother making a purchase again? So if they're disappointed, they're unlikely to. And actually, if they're disappointed, they're more likely to spread bad news than necessarily good. And actually, bad news, unfortunately, spreads quicker than good. So your reputation gets undermined very quickly. So one, you lose repeat purchase, and two, people start bad-mouthing you. So far better, I think, to do the process we do, which is understand the real reasons behind why people make a purchase, the real reasons why the process works, why the values work in terms of persuading people to buy, and use that in the marketing so that the experience that customers have is matched by what they've been sold, by what they've been marketed with. So when they buy the product or use the service or engage with the service, it at least matches what they've been led to believe will happen, or it exceeds it. And then you're more likely to get a repeat sale. and building of reputation. Getting from this massive information to a set of brand values, and for want of better terms, we don't like it, but mission, vision, values. I prefer things like values, purpose, and whatnot. Mission and vision seems a little bit corporate to me, but anyway,
also a little bit old-fashioned.
Yeah,
in some ways, yeah,
but it helps us understand what we're getting at. So how do we get to that from that massive information? It's quite mechanical, actually. And I'll start with my bit and then hand over to you. So my bit is I've interviewed all these people. I transcribe all that they've said. I read through the transcriptions, and progressively as you do so, these areas of commonality between the transcriptions arise. So I end up with sheets of paper with these common phrases from very different or common topics from very different sources starts arising. So I end up with probably 5 or 6 categories of information that all correlate to reasons why people might make a purchase, or to experience they had in making that purchase or in delivering it. And so you've got 4 chunks of information, maybe several pages on each. I then make it 1 page of each by précis, and then a paragraph on each by précis, and then from the paragraph a sentence on each précis. So you've got perhaps 6 sentences at the end of this process that describe the rationale behind the business. So why it exists, how it does what it does, and what it has to offer that's valuably different. And then finally start working on single line propositions that become kind of like the essence of all that other information. And then I hand it to David.
So that information, I think I take that 2 ways, in that I would say that that's the fresh rationalisation for the business, the proposition, and often it makes always it makes a lot more sense than often what they've gone before. But then visually I tend to start by looking at what they're doing at the moment and seeing what they've done in the past, and is there any value in any of that they've got. So have they got any consistency in colour, or the way in which they visually represent themselves, their identity, and try and take the best of what they've got. So this is if you're doing an evolution or trying to develop something, to bring together all of that in a more cohesive, clearer, smarter way. If it's a complete change, then you're looking at how do you visually articulate the things that you've discovered. So, are they being a very traditional offer, or are they trying to be dynamic? How do they trying to fit into their sector? What are their competitors looking like, to try and create something that's unique and stands out? So in both cases, it's trying to bring those resources together so that you can then create something that's compelling, but usually also very consistent. In these days, you want something that's also very flexible, but people can interact with at every different level.
And in a mechanical sense, this appears, as far as the client is concerned, is like a story about their business. That's the words that I talked about that are summarised, supported by imagery and graphics that David develops to represent those words. So it's a bit like a cartoon of what the business is about, what makes it different. What its values are, who its customers are, the market it works in, and all of that represented in this story is like a creative brief to, okay, we now know what this look and feel needs to be like to represent this business out in the world, and we've got lots of pointers in graphics and imagery to take us on that journey, and to make it succinct, to bring it together in a brand or in a campaign. It's the basis for all of that information.
And what can be often really rewarding about that process is that going through that process, you can quite quickly discover actually the obvious answer.
Yes.
So it can become quite clear that if you did visuals over here, that they're just wrong. That that kind of way of doing it won't work, because it doesn't reflect the things that have been discovered. Whereas we mentioned earlier, if you just went in at a cosmetic level, you could go, well, any of these visual options are fine. but they don't actually tie in with the message, the values. It doesn't work. So I've often found that you end up creating things that seem almost obvious, really, because it's just the obvious answer.
Yes.
And most of the time, the client, it is right. The client kind of goes.
It's a formula, isn't
it?
Yes. Yeah. And it's a formula the client can then lean on in the future, if they lose their way a bit, or if they're in a panic, and they're headless chicken mode, knowing how to deal with this panic, and all they need to do is look back at that material that expresses how their business operates, why it operates, what makes it different. And that will be the formula about how to resolve the problem that's facing them. And so much of this information can be reworked for use on websites, for expressing vision, mission, and values. But as I say, as a creative brief for creating anything else that is associated with that brand or business. And in word terms, it's easier for me to express this here than it is for you to do the visual things. But in word terms, for example, we've worked with a compliance business that you would have thought would be their strapline would be about something constraining and getting things right. But actually, we ended up with a strapline that was freedom to innovate, because the compliance gives them the freedom, their clients, the freedom to innovate, because they know they're going to keep within the bounds of the law or whatever health and safety restrictions there are around you, or ISO certifications. They know because of their compliance they're not going to contravene that, and they can innovate within those scopes. So it's freedom to innovate. That's the power that comes from doing the research, understanding why people are making the decisions, and distilling it till you get to this essence of what a brand is.